Welcome. I'm Alan Stoga, Chairman of the Tällberg Foundation. I'm delighted that you are joining us for today's webinar. This virtual session, which, as we've already told you, is being recorded, aims to take the conversation about refugees and migrants a step further than where it usually ends. We all know that more and more people are driven to migrate, either because they're pushed by fear or pulled in by opportunity. We also know that children make up a huge, perhaps the majority, and certainly the increasing share of the people who are on the move. We see those images every day, everywhere. Inevitably, that means that those kids are growing and developing in ways that challenge their future. Today's conversation will attempt to look for solutions. How can children on the move and under the crushing pressures that are associated with how refugees and migrants are treated today, how can they be educated? What works? What do we know doesn't work? In other words, today is a conversation about solutions, and hopefully the first of a series of conversations about solutions. To lead this conversation, today's conversation, we've invited three people who actually are in the solutions business when it comes to educating children outside the normal rhythm of school as we know it in the West. Pashtana Durrani is co-founder and managing director of Learn, which is providing quality education to girls in Afghanistan in spite of, and much to the frustration of, the Taliban. Lala Lovera is founder of Fundación Comparte por una Vida in Colombia, working to educate Venezuelan children who have been forced to flee their country. And Caroline Kronley is president of the Tällberg Foundation, which, among other things, stood up an amazing education initiative during the pandemic that continues to support a wide range of innovative programs in the education space, particularly for young children around the Americas. I should add that Pashtana is a past winner of the Tällberg Global Leadership Prize. You see the address up there in the left-hand corner. Please nominate someone. And Lala Lovera is a current participant in our Tällberg Leaders Mentoring Leaders Program. And again, if you are a younger leader, please nominate yourself because it's a wonderful program. Now, I've asked Caroline to lead this conversation for the next half hour or so before opening to your questions and your comments. Meanwhile, don't hesitate to use the Q&A function if you have questions as they occur to you, so that we can make this as interactive a program as Zoom will allow us. Caroline, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Alan, and Pashtana, Lala. It is such a pleasure to be here with you today. I know in one panel, we're not necessarily going to be able to capture the breadth and diversity of this issue, but I think your own personal experiences and professional work is such an important starting point, and especially as we really focus, as Alan said, on solutions. So Pashtana, let me start with you. You undertook much of your own education as a refugee. You're now working from outside your country as you lead Learn Afghanistan. Tell us a little bit about how your work with your organization intersects with the issues of migration and education, and some of what you're seeing work amidst all of the challenges that we can imagine you face.
Thank you so much, first of all, for doing this, and thank you, Alan, for making this happen. It was a much needed discussion, I think, right now, given the circumstances. Also, when I talk about my work, I think now that as you were asking this question, I was like, I have never worked under normal circumstances, or studied under normal circumstances. It has always been a special case, and I was like, oh, like that is true. But then at the same time, I'm working on this course at Wellesley, and it's about sustaining humanitarian and education efforts in uncertainty. The one thing I have seen is when I ended up in the US is people sort of know there is a system and there is something wrong with the system, and we need to make it right. So people work more on making it right, what to replace, what to innovate, what to bring in. But then I come from a space where we don't have a system. There is no system in place. Everybody is doing something, but collectively it doesn't make a system. So growing up, I think the first example was we had a school in our own home that was educating girls from a curriculum that was made in the 80s by UNICEF. And then I would go to a school that was English medium, and they would teach us in Pakistani curriculum. that was not necessarily catering to my heritage, my culture, or my background where I was coming from. So those were the sort of two boats that I used to struggle with. In the morning, I used to do one thing, and then in the evening, I used to go to that school. And now I realize and reflect on it, that was the major identity crisis, because I never knew which one is my history when I'm studying it, which one is my geography when I'm studying it. And the same goes on with my work now. Even now, when we're working, I think I sometimes envy people from foundations that work with countries that are a little stable. Like every other day, there is no decree. I sort of envy them every time they're like, oh, we made all of this happen, and this was in our strategic plan. And then I'm like, oh, that was our strategic plan. And then we changed it like a million times before we ended up here, because there were a million decrees passed as we were working. There were people who didn't want to do it. We had to deal with surveillance and yeah, so it definitely is one of those spaces where you don't have a framework, and being a person who is obsessed with organization or with the proper scheduling, proper framework, it's very hard for me to deal with all of that, but it still is a space that needs a lot of work, that needs a lot of cohesion, and that needs a lot of support from people who have worked in those stable spaces. So given all of that context, now Afghan children have ended up in the US. And the one thing I'm seeing is a lot of parents reach out to us and they're like, can you let them take classes with the Afghan students back home? And it's very hard for us to make that decision, because they end up in the US, they will go to good schools. Why do they need to be in that space? But then in the end, there are some studies that they need to have access to. For example, the history of Afghanistan, the geography of Afghanistan, or something of that sort. And most of the time, as a migrant myself, when I was a young person, and even now when I see this, young kids struggle so much with that. They struggle with their identities because their parents don't want to let go of their heritage, but they also don't want to bring in this new sort of wholeheartedly accept the new space that they are in. So it's always a struggle, but at the same time, we're all doing the best we can, honestly. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Pashtana. And I think we'll want to come back to that theme of uncertainty that you mentioned, because I think that's a feature of education systems globally, and not just in a context of high migration. So there may be some things that we can learn from the work that you and Lala are doing that could benefit, students across the world and across contexts. Lala, let me turn to you. You've really dedicated your life to making sure that children on the move, internally displaced children, have access to education in the Colombian context. I've had the pleasure of an honor really, of being able to see this work firsthand as you undertake it. So tell us a little bit about the approaches that you're using from Comparte to ensure that kids, even kids in very difficult life circumstances, are able to consistently access education.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you. And thank you, Alan and Tallberg team for this great conversation. And it's an honor to meet you, Pashtana. Totally. I totally admire your work. Yes, Caroline. So we have been working for 7 years in Colombia, in the border between Venezuela and Colombia, which is the city called Cucuta, where all the migratory flows from Venezuela started to they began like in a massive way, like an exodus, really big, in 2017. So we started working in the school, like just Pashtana said. It's like there are many people doing many things, but we are not part of the system, and they are not part of a system. So the Colombian educational system, it's all the time trying to improve, to understand what are the needs of these children, but actually the emergency was kind of a thing that started moving out the socials, the people around NGOs in Colombia to start addressing this issue. So the first thing that in Comparte we start building were strong bonds between communities and organizations, because we understand that this was the way to transform not the lives of the children, but this was the way to be part of the system, how we can build those strong bonds between all the people that were doing something, so we can start working with them. So we have a model that it started like as a project. When you came down here, Caroline, we were just trying to understand what to do because the need was everything. Of course, they were malnourished. They were with health needs, housing, everything. But we understand that we can connect the people in charge and start working in schools. So these children were arriving to schools in order to be in a safe space, not to learn, but to be in a safe space, to find, to understand that they belong to a place. And of course, in schools is where they belong. So we in Comparte started enhancing these children capacities and capabilities so we can start generating agency while bringing the opportunities. And we do this through our model that is called Stay in School, which promotes the retention of the children in schools in the safe place. How we do this, we strengthen the safe spaces of this, I love to call the host schools, because they are the one who are hosting them. They are the one who are embracing them. And that's the way we're trying to close those inequality gaps, like access to water, safe water. These children and also the host communities and the schools, they don't have access to safe water. Malnourishment, this is something that really, really came into our alarm system in the organization in Comparte. Our whole team, we were really aware that 42% of the children that were coming from Venezuela were malnourished. So this is something that we needed to address, because it's a children that is malnourished. We all know they won't have the same opportunities of nourished children. So we started working with that. Of course, mental health going beyond the migration process that the family were going. So we started working with these amazing partners with mental health so they can start embracing their issues. And also some physical health. And this model, Stay in School, have 3 dimensions. The first is balancing. So as we were addressing malnourishment, it's like we address immediate needs that have a medium and long-term impact. So those needs that must be addressed and be balanced to the life of children and youth, so they can continue working in education, or they can continue in their inclusion. So we have balancing, we have educating. It's like a dimension where we see ourselves as an incubator of citizens. So they are going to be aware of their rights. They're going to be active members of their communities. We train trainers in the community, so they're going to start working the inclusion thing, because in Colombia, a few in Duque's government, we have this part of this law, so they can have their passport or their identification is called EPTV. It's a temporary permission to be here. But they don't understand. These communities, they are down there. They don't know how to use it. They don't know how to get into it. So we start forming formers and training trainees so they can start giving their voices to their communities, so we can formalize their migration process in Colombia. And it's an amazing, because the focus is, of course, rights and duties. And that's how you became a citizen of the host community or the host country where you are coming. So we work hand by hand with the community to ensure agency and inform decision taking. We don't bring the decision. We bring the information. So we work together so they can, this decision making of the community will be informed. And also we do advocacy. And this is very important, because we work very closely to the community. We are so close, and we bring this bond of trust with the communities and families. And so that's the way we can build with them the path to the inclusion opportunities that they have around in the country, such as I always say, regularization in Colombia. We are also part of the decision-taking teams, and we bring evidence and we bring data that is based, but is evidence-based. So those opportunities that are tailored are really approach to the capacities of the community. So it's going to, so we see ourselves in Comparte as that bond, that strength, really strength bond between all the actors that are trying to be part of the system. This is how we understand and how we have been doing an amazing teamwork with all the part of the
Thank
system.
you, Lala. Yeah, and I would like to come back in a little bit to the sort of broader case of Colombia, which I think is a fascinating one. But I want to sort of pull on a thread that you referenced. You know, we can of course think about schools as places where all children learn to read and write. They learn basic math, all kinds of academic and intellectual skills that will serve them in life. But you also alluded, Lala, to school serving another function, and Pashtana referenced it too. So helping to ensure well-being, being a safe space, a place where students, children can access all kinds of services that they and their families might need. And frankly, right here in New York, we're experiencing a wave of new arrivals, thousands of asylum seekers coming to New York City, and we're seeing that public schools are kind of the first step in those families finding solid ground here in the city. So Pashtana, turning to you, I'm curious, you know, how that resonates with what you're seeing and what kind of work you find yourself doing with students, with parents, with schools themselves to make sure that kids can sort of make the most of this more holistic role of education in terms of providing some stability and safety in their lives.
I love the word holistic so much these days because I have been reflecting on what sort of, and also like, you know, as a woman, as a young person, I want to know what I was not given. How can I ensure that I provide that in a space, but I also sort of not overdo it. So it does like, you know, serves its purpose, but it's also not stepping into other places that we're not putting so much pressure on teacher. You know, one thing I have seen is we expect our teachers, or at least the education system in the US, expects the teacher to be a person who is a psychologist, you know, who is a therapist, who is looking into the students' social life, personal life, well-being, and then also teach them and be their guidance counselor and all of that. And I sort of don't necessarily like that because I do think that a teacher who is very underpaid should be doing all of that. But then at the same time, learning from that, one thing I wanted for the longest time was making sure we create a space that is holistic, where we are giving them mental health and awareness and well-being on all of the things that are needed, given that we work in a country that is constitutionally, has no constitution, by the way, has the first decree that was given in accordance to young girls was, oh, you cannot go to school anymore. Apart from that, there are decrees that are issued every week that says you cannot go to public, you cannot use Facebook, you cannot use cell phone, you cannot exist out of this space that you call home. So how do you combat that, but in a way where you don't have to fight it, you know, with arms, of course. So with that, when we come to our schools, so the teachers, of course, teach biophysics, chemistry, mathematics. That's what they're teaching. But then we have this a group that goes on every Friday that they do a health and awareness circle where they talk about everything that they're feeling and they're going through, you know, and they process it as a group. So there you don't have to be a teacher or a student, but a peer, because you're a woman and you're in a country, so you share multiple things: religion, identity, geography, language, but also most importantly, the political band. It's on you because of your gender. So we do that, but then like, you know, moving towards a more practical mean for me would be, how do we teach these young girls to become decision makers in their families? And how do we enable them? And that enabling comes through financial means, And of course, us being people with a theory that you cannot give people money to be in school, I'm highly against it. So the second best thing we could do is teach them how to earn money. And we do this with as young as 12 years old. We start teaching them web designing, coding, literally assisting people in work, interning for them, and getting online jobs. And I think that gives them that sort of space where if they're bringing in something to the table, they get to talk about that. They get to make those decisions. So given that we work with girls from age 12 to now 18 and 20, most of our focus is, okay, we're going to teach you something that you're going to need in 5 years or 10 years, biophysics, chemistry, mathematics. You graduate from here, you go to a good college, and you end up becoming a scientist or a doctor or whatsoever. But we're also going to teach you something that you need in the short run to continue becoming that person that you want to be in the long run. That is becoming someone's virtual assistant, coding, designing, volunteering somewhere, then getting a job. But last and not the least, we also want to focus on your physical and mental health, because you cannot even walk outside. So we're going to provide you all the space that you need to talk about menstrual hygiene management. We're going to provide you with all those products that you need. We're going to help you make them in case you drop out of school or you don't have access to it. And then we're going to make sure that we give you more idea on how to journal your emotions and thoughts, what to read, how to process it, who to talk to, and who to confide in. So we are sort of creating those spaces, but not necessarily teacher is at the center of it. It's more of like a space where we're all bonded by the situation. And then comes the parents. Because one thing I believe in is, if you're sending your daughter to school and you're dropping her in a situation where if you're seen doing that, you could actually go missing. I think for me, it's such a highly hopeful and respectful thing, but also such a dangerous thing, So our engagement with the parents is more on safety, on how to ensure that the girls, if they're showing up to school, how they continue showing up in schools. But then at the same time, catering to their needs. I was talking to teachers the other day in Kandahar, and she told me, she was like, a mother came in and she wouldn't leave until we would give her daughter an admission. And she started crying. And I was like, if I tell this to anyone outside Afghanistan right now, they won't believe me. Because in their head, Afghanistan, and especially Kandahar, is the Taliban stronghold and nothing is happening. But these are actual people, and the Taliban are telling people that, oh, our people don't want education. But this is a mother in Kandahar showing up and doing that, right? So how do we cater to that? How do we expand on that? How do we provide more spaces to that? How do we bring in mothers with their daughters to give them that space, given that they're also vulnerable and they don't have that space? So that's teacher and parents. But then given that the main protagonist or the main hero in my story is always the young student, I think for me, it's very important to talk to them. The one thing that I do every month is in the middle of the night at 12 a.m. to 3 a.m., I talk to all my students all across Afghanistan. We have around 400 students. We just launched our fifth school yesterday, and we talk to all of them. We ask them, what do you need? What is something that you basically need right now, and what is something that you need through this course? Most of the time, they're like, we need more time. We need more space. Get us a new door because we don't like this door. It's random requests, right? But it's something that they feel confident or safe enough to confide in. And I love that, because our country has not provided those spaces enough for them. The other day, I didn't even know they had made a science competition of their own with the teachers, and they went on and talked about stuff that I don't even remember from my school, And it was an amazing thing to see that girls on their own are taking initiative and becoming part of this community and writing articles about it. So I think for me, the main audience or the main person stays the student. Everyone else caters to them, but I also ensure that everything doesn't end up on the teacher. So we try to take as much as load as possible. Yeah.
I have to say, something I admire so much about both of your leadership is the way that, despite these sort of enormous challenges and this constant churn of uncertainty, new restrictions placed on the lives of women and girls, as you're describing, Pashtana, or Lala, the unprecedented impact of the pandemic, for example, on the lives of Venezuelans in Colombia. This kind of relentless resourcefulness and ability to find new paths forward, new ways to respond, new ways to listen to the communities that you're working with. It's incredibly impressive and moving. Lala, I thought I wanted to return to the case of Colombia because I think, zooming out from all of the beauty and care that's embedded in the work that you were both doing, there are systems that are also trying to navigate these challenges. If we think about the case of Colombia, for example, I think about 600,000 students from Venezuela are currently enrolled in the Colombian educational system, so about 6% of total enrollment. That's a pretty stunning number. There's other countries in the world that have similar numbers. But what do you think, and recognizing, of course, that it's not yet perfect, like lots of kids still lack access, but what do you think has worked or is working to enable that level of educational integration in Colombia? And are there things that you think the rest of the world could learn?
Well, I have, as you say, Caroline, of course, there are a lot of challenges right now, like unaccompanied children, and we have the overage children that they can't have access because of the system. But that's a huge number that represents, like I said, I hate numbers because they are inhuman. They are like each number, it's a life. So I think that we need to take what Colombia patience, I think is so important to be patient with the host community. We need to work with the host community, not only with the migrants. I'm a migrant in Colombia, of course, and I've been here for 15 years and I feel a migrant. I am part of the host community too, but I'm a migrant, and also my children. But we need to work hand by hand, not only talking to and addressing to the migrants, but also with the host community. I think it's very important. So Colombia has been working with all this efforts with the government, civil society, also the NGOs that are led by refugees or migrants are so important to be part of the system. And Colombia understood this. And they are bringing together to these tables where they will take all this, or the decision makers are trying to understand the opportunities that they can bring. Just yesterday, we saw a beautiful and amazing investigation about all the incomes in terms of taxes that the Venezuelan migrants have brought to Colombia. So these are the important narratives that we need to bring to the decision makers, even to the news. And I think that we have this responsibility not only to work with the children, of course, that's our first priority, but also to start changing the narrative about the people. Also, we are trying to change the narrative about how Colombians see Venezuelans in the move, because we need to change that pity look, no? Like, so I feel pity, I feel sorry for these people, that's why we need to integrate them. No. So these people are bringing capacities, these people are bringing work, these people are part of the workforce that Colombia has lost. These children will cover some demographic issues that Colombia with the war has lost. So this is the narrative that we need. And by creating leaders in the schools, by creating those safe spaces, and they can start working in their leadership. And also, as Pashtana said, with the parents, it's so important to work with them also, because these children will be the decision makers in their families with all the strengths that we are and all the capacity. So I think it's what have been working. I think the most important word, it's patience. We need to be patient, because we don't like perfection. I think it's perfection in this thing. It's totally the wrong side. So, but we need to start looking for the little things that have making a good impact. as the regularization. I think it's need to be the region, for example, in Latin America, they need to address migration in Latin America as a whole thing, not the countries, like each country doing efforts. So if the region, and that's going to be my invitation, if people here is listening to us, we are open through different part of innovators and social innovators to work as a region, so we can address the right of education, the right of health of all the people in the move. So patients and of course the regularization in Colombia is an amazing instrument in order to really guarantee all the rights of these people in the move.
Thank you so much, Lala. And I think your commentary, Pashtana and Lala, is stimulating a lot of reflection and questions from the folks attending the webinar today. So I'm going to turn to the Q&A, and I invite folks to submit their own questions, and we'll try to get through as many as we can. So Lars is sort of picking up on something that Pashtana spoke about early on related to the challenges of dual identity, right? Whether it's Afghan children in Pakistan or in the US, Venezuelan children in Colombia, how do your organizations and how do you as leaders and role models help children navigate that potential conflict of identities that they might experience as part of their education? Pashtana, do you want to start?
I mean, being that child myself, a younger version of me, I always had so many confusing thoughts. Even when I returned back to Afghanistan, I was not fully seen as a full Afghan because I was not raised in my early years in Afghanistan. And I sort of always had an inferiority complex. I'm going to be honest about it. And I was like, why not? Like, what is wrong with that? But at the same time, I think we also have to understand that countries, as Lala said, that Colombia is giving them that space where they can actually go for that paper and for that passport or some that sort. But with Afghans in Pakistan, they don't have that. They get refugee cards, but you could be settled for 25 years or 30 years, and you might be seeing it now that you will be just turned away from everything, and everything will be taken away from you, and you will be sent to Afghanistan with nothing. Most refugees who are returning to Afghanistan are ending up with $200 or $300 from everything that they have earned. So it's a very different space. So in that space, I think when I ended up in the US, I was still going through that identity crisis. I met Amna Nawaz. She's one of my friends, and she told me, she was like, listen to me. You grew up in different cultures. You're ending up in a different culture at a very young age. And you're going to pick up on many things that are going to make you think that you're the other person. You're going to be othered from a lot of things. But then you can pick up the good things from all the cultures that you have been with or have grown up in. And then you can make your own part of space of your culture that you can relate to and feel safe with. And everything negative and toxic should be left out of it. Now, I know it's more of like a health and wellness thing, but I think it sort of helped me. And this is what we do with our children all over the world, but also especially when it comes to Iran and Pakistan, where they are ending up the most, and they're the most, I would say, hostile in many ways. The host communities are hostile. They don't see them as refugees, but as people who are coming up from a country that is engulfed with terrorism and is being led by terrorists. So how do you deal with that? The first thing that we do is we ensure that they have values, as Lala said, and I love the word patience. Values like patience and courage are instilled in them, which I personally think that they don't need courage to stand up to people and tell them, oh, I'm an Afghan and I'm proud of it. But also it's very important for them to know that it's okay to be an Afghan. It's okay that if somebody is feeling hostile towards you, it's not necessarily your problem to solve. It's totally fine. Let them have it. But it doesn't change anything with you. But then at the same time, the more they grow up, we try to have conversations with them. I think it's not something you can integrate into curriculum, like how to deal with identity crisis. But at the same time, it depends. Like in the US, if you get a special immigrant visa and you end up with a green card in a month and you end up getting integrated there. And the funny thing is, I meet all these Afghans, they're like Afghan American, or Afghan Canadian, Afghan British. But if you grew up in Pakistan and Iran, you don't become Afghan Pakistani or Afghan Iranian. You are an Afghan.
Yeah.
So that also makes me think, what country gives you the privilege to call you that second, part of your citizenship or your upbringing? But yeah, at the end of the day, it's all about conversation. I had those growing up, and we tend to have those with all the returning refugees in Afghanistan too.
Yeah. We have a question from Idun about where the money comes from for all of this amazing work that you're describing. So Idun asks, is money a problem? I can imagine both of you would say it is. Spend a lot of your time fundraising, but you could tell us, how are these initiatives funded? Learn Afghanistan and Comparte. Do refugees or migrants provide their own resources? Or perhaps do you rely on foreign aid, international philanthropic support, et cetera? So Lala, tell us a little bit about how you find the financial resources to do this important work.
Well, of course, money is an issue. Of course, we as an NGO from the civil society, family and friends, this started, and but also bring in the data and the stories of the people that we're working helps a lot. So we try, as I said, of course we need numbers, of course we need data, and based on evidence, but we bring the humanity also to the story. So we try to be, when I said that our model had that dimension of advocacy, it's not only to bring the advocacy to the government to make decisions, we bring the advocacy also to all the funding systems. So we try to be that strength bond also with the private sector of Colombia, to make them understand that the migrants are part of the system, are part of the country, and they're not going back. So, because those are the numbers around the world, of course, with Pashtana and the School of Pashtana, of course, going back to Afghanistan is not pretty sure if you're out, is not in the conversation. But also when you migrate from Venezuela, for example, and you start a life here in another country, and you finally get into the system, it's like migrating again to your own country, and that's not in the table for the people. So we try to work really together with the private sector. Also, we international. Well, of course, Tinker Foundation was one of our best partners in COVID, Caroline, and I have to take this into this conversation because you trust in our work, so we could continue the work through COVID, which was really, really hard around the world. But in these communities, in the border between Venezuela and Colombia, we're like, okay, now we're going to have this pandemic. So how we can keep the safe space, but in their houses. And that was thanks to Tinker Foundation. So one of our principles is accountability. So we are so strict with our numbers and how we communicate with our partners. So we are open to international funds, individual funds, government funds, like all this USAID is here, and all this American and European funds are in Colombia. And we're training our team so we can be accountable to all the projects that also international cooperation in Colombia or international funders are here. It's a huge thing, and Pashtana can tell, like being sustainable in an NGO, it's like a huge step. But we are blessed because we have a really capable team, professional team, that they don't forget that we're working with human beings. So that's one of our biggest things.
Yeah, thanks, Lala. And one thing I want to say that I think is really important about that advocacy or influence role that you play is the improvements that you're driving in schools not only benefit Venezuelan or internally displaced Colombian students, but all students, right? And so you're going to the mayor and saying, did you know that you have schools in your district that don't have safe running water for all students? Is that an acceptable situation for you, right? So it's sort of this notion of leveraging public resources so that they benefit all students, including students facing migration. Pashtana, we have a bunch of good questions coming in that I want to be sure to address, but I want to give you the space to answer the resources question for Learn Afghanistan as well.
And I would love to answer this question because we recently, last week, we found our sustainability plan. Yes. So 4 years ago, we had this sustainability strategy that we had put in place. But then again, of course, Afghanistan fell and everything was changed and challenged. But fun. Now Learn is sort of, I think, would say sustainable and is on the way to becoming 100% sustainable through our products. So what we do is we create content for young girls and young boys and everyone across the country, but we do it in native languages. And when we were doing it in 2020, before even COVID hit, it was, I think, 2019 when we started it, but in 2020, somebody reached out to me and they were like, oh, you're doing this work. And I think because of COVID, we should just license it and then give it to other organizations or bigger radio stations and all of that. And maybe they will help you get funding for it. And I was like, okay, but then everything fell apart. Now we have restarted the conversations. And after a year, we're finally able to crack the code on sustainability. We provide video content to a SIM card company, and then they publish it across the country. And then with each view, we get paid for that service. And that payment goes back into sustaining for teacher salaries or making more content and stuff. And the reason I'm bringing in this, because when I started Learn, I hate asking for money. So that was the first thing. I was like, how do I let go of that? How do I find a way where I don't have to ask for money? The next best thing was create something that people are gonna pay you to consume, So we did that. And then the second thing, I think if you do a lot of research on Afghanistan, the worst thing that anyone could do to us and the humanitarian industry did to us was come to Afghanistan, work with women and people, build their capacity in something what we had capacity for thousands of years was embroidery. So if you go to all our organizations, what they do is they make them do embroidery and then they go to other countries and sell them and give them money, which is a fine thing, but I think it needed innovation. And that's where now that we're doing this, I'm rubbing it in everyone's face and I'm like, we're doing that, something out of the box, and it's in Afghanistan and it's generating income. So I think that's important for me and for organizations in general to have a way of income that doesn't heavily rely on foundations and grants. And because I saw this firsthand, people withdrew from Afghanistan like it never existed, So it has to be something bigger than that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for that. So we have a number of other questions. One is actually directed to me, considering our work at the Tinker Foundation includes contexts like specifically the questioner mentioned Central America, where there are communities that have really high rates of violence, and how does that affect education? I think in the interest of time, I'll actually briefly reference the amazing work of another Tallberg leader, Selena de Sola, who leads Glasswing International, that does really striking work in educational communities, thinking about the impact that chronic violence has not only on students' ability to learn, but also the trauma that teachers themselves carry with them. And so, it may not be possible to change the conditions outside of a school. There's a lot of work, and Glasswings is really an exemplar here, to make sure that school communities can be those safe spaces that Lala referenced, and that students and again teachers also have the tools to kind of leave the impact of violence at the door, and really engage fully in the learning process. So really important question that we could spend a whole webinar on, but for now I'll just highlight that there are definitely models at work, and I'm happy to share more offline with anyone who's interested. We have a great question here from Sandra about quality. So educational quality. So given all the challenges that you've described, Sandra asks, is it really possible to give kids real educations? Where do you find the curricula? Where do you find the books and teaching materials? How do you make sure that you maintain quality in terms of the work of teachers and overall, what students in your programs are getting access to? Who would like to answer that? Pashtana? Okay, go ahead.
I think it's more relevant given that we work with this. just to be safer and faster. So what we do with our curriculum is, yes, it's possible to maintain quality education. The most important thing you have to do is you have to make your own framework, even if there is no framework available. We go for references, we go for curriculum, we go for 2020 National Education Strategic Plan for Afghanistan. But then again, I personally go and study Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Iran, Pakistan, around countries, and what they're teaching and how we could use that and leverage it in our own studies. But then again, geography and history, that remains the same almost. We continue ensuring that we update it as much, but continue teaching it what was taught in the past 20 years before the instability came in. So that's something that we have done, and we continue updating it with curriculum that is more cohesive from Canada, from US, even from India, and make sure that we bring in all the good things that we would need and leave out the things that might not be relevant to our context. So that's what we do with curriculum. And most of the time when we do that, we go back to big brothers or big sisters like Save the Children, UNICEF, Education Cannot Wait, and we get their approval and see what do they think about it. And most of the time we get a green light, and that's one thing we have continued doing and innovating with curriculum. Well, the second thing that we do is we employ teachers who were part of our network with within the time when we were working with as students in public schools. So we bring in those teachers, and that's what one thing that we do. But when we bring them in, given that we are a digital literacy based program, the first thing we do is we train them at least for 6 weeks, and we continue mentoring them throughout that program. And that sort of sets the precedent for how you have to be in class and what you have to deliver. So that gives them like sort of a lessons learned or outcomes and expectations for them. So that's what we do with the teachers. But then overall, I think the one thing you could do is, and help yourself with that, is make a system for yourself that can be a little resilient towards the challenges that you're going to see. So there are times where the schools are closed for 3 weeks. When they come back, what is the first thing you do? You do reflections, but you don't just necessarily go back to what you were teaching. You restart what a 2 steps back approach, you know? So sort of those sort of things, we always do it, but it definitely is more doable to provide quality education. You just have to think more, I would say, strategically about it, but it definitely is possible.
Thank you so much, Pashtana. It sounds like your teachers have the chance to themselves be students, right? And experience what it's like to be on the receiving end of these digital tools and strategies. That's fantastic. So Lala, let me tweak the question a little bit for you for Comparte, because you're not necessarily providing academic instruction to students, but you really need to think about program quality constantly. And actually just before the webinar started, Lala was sharing that Comparte is very actively growing. You're going to a new city, Cartagena, that also has very high rates of migration. So as you grow, how are you thinking about the kind of continued fidelity of the program and making sure that the interventions continue to engage and benefit and respond to the needs of children and families?
Well, of course, just to answer a little bit of the quality, we see ourselves that we are not, of course, working with the curriculum standards of the government in Colombia, which is really, really, well, it's really hard. But we work with the infrastructure, and the resources of the school, which will guarantee something like access to safe water. And the community engagement. So those are the things that we're trying to contribute and to promote inside the school. So they're going to be part of the high quality standards for a good education. This is how we see ourselves in trying to work with the school. Now, how we guarantee our quality thing. So every time we are trying to scale, because the word grow, I really am scared of the word growing. So we're scaling up our model because we're trying to reach up to more children, not to more schools, but the way we reach to children is through schools. So our board directors are so strict, and they accompany us with our strategy. So we, basing our evidence and in our data, we're all the time analyzing that. We also opened this year we have a meal official, which is going to be monitoring and evaluating and analyzing all the data, so we can start arranging our model and all this theory of change. Of course, we are all the time making in all these questions. Are we doing the things that we need to do? Are we improving the capacities of these communities? Are we building together, because we don't want to build by ourselves the solutions. We don't see ourselves as a solution. We see ourselves as this bond that we can build together with the community. So going in Colombia to a different region and into a different city, it's like going to another country. It's amazing. It's really amazing how the cultural diversity in Colombia changes from one city to another. So the most important thing is collecting data in the site, going there, understanding, listening. It's like we have been practicing and we are engaging, for example, in Acumen's Academy, how they bring all the listening of the community, how we can bring that listening to our organization so we can start working in the quality. So the shortest answer, Caroline and everybody and Pashtana, is we try to bring the evidence and to understand the evidence and the people's not needs, but the people's way of living, so we can address with some ideas so they can build up their solutions. And I don't want to be romantic about migration needs. I think this is so important. When I talk, as Pashtana said, about patients and about human, so I don't want to be a romantic people about the issues and the important views of addressing in a human way the migration, but also these are important things to bring to the conversation, because it's not will stay as an academic conversation or as a legal and government conversation. And I think my duty, my most important duty, is to bring the voice of the people so we can bring the opportunities.
Yeah, so that is the opposite of imposing a kind of cut and paste solution. You're really starting from what are the sort of demands and opportunities that you're hearing articulated by communities themselves, and building your plan up from that, using all the evidence, you know, that you've accumulated over the years. I want to get back to something really striking that Pashtana said at the beginning of this conversation, which is that at Learn Afghanistan, you've never had the benefit of strategic certainty, right? It's always been a sort of evolutionary process. You've always had to iterate on the fly in response to changing and really challenging conditions. And that brings me to something that I wanted to ask you about. I think one thing that we saw over the last 4 years of the pandemic, even those of us in very privileged situations, is that the education system is more fragile than we realized. Students of all backgrounds might suddenly find themselves in the position of needing to reintegrate into an academic environment or get caught up on their learning. Calvin asked a question about how you sort of level up the learning of students who are, you know, very behind. So I think that ties to this question as well. I'm wondering, you know, as you look out on a landscape in which we can only expect education to be disrupted more and more, whether for the reasons that you two have both lived and articulated, or climate crisis, or any number of other reasons, you know, what learning or lessons do you think that we can benefit from in terms of the work that you've both done to make sure that when families and children face disruption, that education isn't the first casualty? Do you think that there are things that your work has to offer to a kind of broader global community of people thinking about education? Pashtana?
I think the one thing I have learned is education can be constant. You know, it can be a constant even with the uncertainty, you know, that now that I think about it, is I used to be young and I used to go to my Pashto lessons or my history lessons a lot. And I didn't know why. Why was that? Why would I, every time I had some sort of emotional sort of trajectory going on, I would go to those lessons and I would learn them again and again and again and again. And now I think about it, it's all about safety. How do you feel safe in that space, in that lesson? And I think the one thing I have learned is through our work in Afghanistan, when we started, it was 40 countries fighting in Afghanistan and Taliban taking hostages a whole district. And the people who were the victims were young girls. So I learned firsthand, oh, we need to come up with a solution that caters to them. And then we transitioned into a place where we didn't even know who the president was. And then we transitioned into a place where the regime changed. And now we're in a place where the country thinks that it doesn't matter if you educate a girl or not, you know. So you're going with all of that. But the one thing that stayed constant is we continued with these girls and we continued with them. And these were in grade 4 and 5. And now they're in grade 8 and 9. And they continue coming to these spaces. So one thing I have learned is invest in people big time. People who are going to be your allies, people who are going to be working with you, people who are going to be creating that space for you. When Afghanistan fell, I didn't think Learn was going to survive. My people, my team, and I confided in them. They're like, oh no, it's going to work out. We are going to make it happen. And I walked into a space where I had 100 students. I had all my teachers. And the one thing, the reason was because I trusted them and I invested so much, my time, my energy, and resources in those communities where they were from. They believed that I wouldn't leave them hanging. So they believed in me and I believed in them. And I think investing in those communities, in those spaces, has made all the difference. People reach out to me now from spaces that I don't even know, and we work out with them. The most important thing I have learned is you can find all the resources you want. So don't think, oh, I'm going to run out of funding. It's going to come through some way, one way or the other. But the most important part is you need to have allies who are going to implement it for you, who are going to be there for you, who are going to make sure that they hold your hand when you're going through this transition. So that's, that's something that you have to provide. But of course, centering it around education and making it a constant in someone's life. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
want-
Lala, yeah, what can the education world learn from your work?
Well, I think we need to create leaders, and this is a huge thing to say. It's you can say it easily, but how we do it. So, of course, saving the difference between Afghanistan and our movement here in Latin America, and why they're migrating, they're different, but they're human beings, as Pashtana said. So I think they want to be seen, to be here. They want to talk, they want to belong. And I think that's the most important thing. So we need to build those bonds really strong, so they think they know that they belong there and they have something to bring and something to receive. It's not only education one way, it's both ways, no? So you are giving something to your group, to your teachers, to your community, and also you are receiving. So that's how we really establish that close relationship with the children and youth, so they can be working together and being part. So this can answer a little bit of the identity thing that a few questions ago. So the most important thing is bring them, making them understand that they have something to give, very important, that they have a voice and they want to be part. So when you create that leader, that starts like it's magical. It's amazing. So empowering that self-managing leadership with the children, it's amazing. I think it's one of the most important thing. And also that connection, really close connection with the children, being there. I think it's so important also. And that's what it's a challenge, of course. It's more expensive intervention, of course. It's not a humanitarian action because you're going to be there. As Pashtana said, someone is going to grab your hand and we're going to grab yours. So we're going to be together here. And I have some funders that ask me, so you're going to be in the school forever? Well, maybe I'm part of the system and I'm going to be forever there. And I love being there, being part of the system. So I think that's a very important thing, creating those leaders by a close relationship with them.
Thank you so much, Lala. I want to bring in the voice of someone who's working on a sort of different side of these issues. And I think it's a important reality to engage with. So Elena writes us, I'm working with kids left behind in rural Venezuela. So we're talking a lot about migration. These are the children who, for whatever reason, are whether their family members have migrated or not, they remain. Like in the case of Afghanistan, getting funding to Venezuela is very challenging, Elena writes. Are there any experiences in which migrant and local communities, so the communities that are back at home, cooperate in terms of funding and other matters? It's something we'd be interested in exploring. And Elena, I just say, if you want to drop your contact information into the Q&A, we'll be happy to connect you directly with Lala, who I think probably has a lot more to say about this offline as well. But how are you both thinking about this question of the children who are left behind, and how you can engage or reach them if you can through the work that you do? Pashtana?
I think one thing that Lala said, like education has to be practical too. Like it can be a philosophy, but it has to be practical too. The one thing that we do is we make sure that the people who are left behind, especially children, they're in touch in one way or the other. So they have a sort of a lifeline, a contact with you or someone like you who is educating them in that space. The one thing that we did was when Afghanistan fell was we came up with a radio program that goes across all Afghanistan and in all the 34 provinces in both native languages, but it also goes into the Pashto-speaking regions of Pakistan. So it goes into those places where the refugees would end up if they end up going from Afghanistan to Pakistan. And what that does is it gives you a lifeline to still be able to be educated, even if you don't end up in a school. But then at the same time, it gives you a space where you're hearing someone teach you in your native language, where you might not have that in your host community. I think for me, it might be a little hard given that I work with communities that have been more hostile towards refugees, especially in the Iranian context. Like, there were people who would literally just cut people's ears off. I mean, I'm sorry to say that, but that's the reality of it. And then there are people who are harassed when they're crossing border into Pakistan. So while I'm saying this is, for me, it's important for that child to be able to relate to Afghanistan or have that safe space in that lesson. And that's the sort of left behind approach we give them. But then, of course, if the host community is nice or has more to offer, I think the situation is completely different. Like in the US, people reach out to me all the time just to come and talk to the Afghan children settled in their communities, or to print out books that are going to help them learn and transition. So it depends on what the host community's feelings are, most importantly, but also, do they have enough resources to share,
Yeah. Thanks, Pashtana. I love that example of radio. And one brief kind of anecdote from our own funding from Tinker Foundation during the pandemic. There was a lot of talk early on about, this is going to bring sort of usher in a whole new wave of really sophisticated ed tech. And what we found was actually kind of old tech, like community radio, was some of what was most useful for reaching the most excluded children. And, to the quality question, not necessarily replacing an in-classroom educational experience, of course not, but helping to keep kids connected to learning. I'm thinking of contexts like rural Guatemala, Amazonian regions of Peru, where we saw this technology or this sort of a strategy really be successful. And sort of more than anything, helping just to reinforce for students, even if they were disconnected from learning, that they still retain the identity of students and learners, right? That no matter what else, they were still learning and they would someday have the chance to go back into a formal school setting. And that in and of itself, it's not a replacement, but it's incredibly powerful. So I love to hear that you found those kinds of strategies effective as well. Lala, let me ask you the question briefly about students who are left behind. And then I think we'll close with one final question, which is, what do you both need in your extraordinary work to take it to the next level? So Lala, what are your thoughts on the question from Elena?
Yes. Well, the communities that we work here in Colombia, both the Colombian and the migrants, are alike in terms of needs and access to services. So this is something that I have been telling to Colombia and the local governments. This is an opportunity for Colombia to address the gaps in these communities that have been displaced, that have been going around. So, of course, as Pashtana said, the most important thing is that these children know that they have someone to get into, and that's and you build that through trust. So that proximity and working together with them. I think also, and for Elena specifically that she's working in Venezuela, I would love to get this conversation into another level, but the most important thing is to give the correct information. We have seen that the narrative from the migrants that had left the country with all the guilt, that's why mental health is so important for our families, and start working with professionals that will work and address that migration process, and also the guilt of leaving the country, and also the guilt of leaving behind some people. And as Pashtana experienced working with women, when they migrate, they don't migrate alone. They migrate with the whole family in their bags. The ones that she left, that one she's coming to, and the ones by her hand. So this is so important to understand. We need to bring the correct information. Migration in an irregular way is not like you plan a vacation. So they need to have the information of the country they're living. They need to understand where they're going. And I think that for the Venezuelan case right now, specifically, is so important for these children to understand what it means to start on the move, and to Colombia, because they have these ideas and narratives from the people, from the government, from the people that have migrated, that's the salvation, and that you're going to be covered, and that's not true. So I think it's so important to start working with them. Also, so how we want to escalate to continue, well, building more bonds and strengthening our bond around the globe, working with the region. I think it's so important to work with the region. As I said before, it's so important to understand that all the countries and the host countries right now, or all the countries in the world, are host countries. I know that this is something incredible. So we need to prepare, and we need to change the view and the narrative, because we're continue doing the same things and getting the same bad results. So bringing these spaces as Tallberg has brought us together here to bring the experiences from Pashtana, like in Afghanistan, and we working here in Colombia. We said, well, what do they have in common? A lot. I've been writing a lot of the things that you're doing, Pashtana. I think those things, and bringing it to the table in this spaces as Tallberg, is the most important thing. Sharing is caring, as we know. So I think it's the most important, creating those bonds, sitting down and listening to people that have been working in the same issues and in the movement. I think is the most important thing that we can do.
Thank you, Lala. And so same question to you, Pashtana, from the chat. And I'm sorry we weren't able to answer more of the questions because they're really wonderful. But what would it take, or what does it look like for you to take your work to the next level?
Let's see okay. So I saw a few questions. So yes, first of all, we are going to take it to other countries. I'm just going to make sure that I respond to the ones addressed to me. I'm becoming greedy with the time. Anyways, yes, we're hoping to take it to other countries. We're hoping to take it to conflict zones and sister conflict countries like Yemen, Syria, Iraq, and more countries that have sort of made women and young girls and their education politicized will be our focus. And how, if the girl is ending out of school, how do we make sure that they end up in school or in a space like Learn? So that's what we are doing overall. That is the strategy in the next 7 years, taking it all over. Hopefully the conflict doesn't persist, but that's the reality of it. So we have to do that. Within Afghanistan, our hope is to expand within the 34 provinces by the end of next year. And what do we need for all of that? We need support, we need funding, we need people who are going to give us the seed funding. We don't necessarily need funding for the next 10 years to sustain those spaces, but we do need funding to get the laptops, get the internet up and running, get people in those spaces, get the community have those resources accessible. So we need all of that. And then apart from that, given the current situation, politically, not a lot of countries are committed to Afghanistan. So for us, it's very important to have allies, let's say like Tallberg, like I reach out to Alan every now and then, and he always responds. But you necessarily will never find that with governments or people who committed to Afghanistan in large sums of money, and now they don't even care about Afghanistan. So you need to have those genuine allies who are going to reach out to you and support you when you need them. So those are the sort of things that we are hoping to do right now and build the community of our allies when we're doing that. Yeah.
Thank you so much to both of you. I am so inspired by both your patience and your sense of urgency at the same time. And I've learned a lot from listening to you both. Ellen, let me turn it back to you.
Thank you, Caroline. I want to just add three things. First, I want to thank all of you for both what you're doing, but also for sharing what you're doing. Because it's one thing to work in your silo and stay incredibly focused on what you're doing, but opening up that silo to others, I think, is both part of your obligation, but is also, I know, terribly important. Secondly, I want to pick up on something, on a word that Lala used and explained, which was leaders. You all are leaders in your own space, and have engaged with Tällberg around that leadership. Those of you in the audience, notice that sign on your laptop or on your screen. Please nominate a leader for this year's competition. Please encourage a younger leader to apply for our mentoring program. It's actually something we all need to do, because if we don't get leadership right, all of the rest collapses. And thirdly, just a reflection from today's conversation, not asking anyone to answer it now, but I'm wondering if there isn't a working group here that we ought to set up among people like Caroline, Lala, Pashtana, and some of you in the audience who are working in these spaces, because there are clearly best practices. That's why Lala's taking all these notes and Pashtana was taking all her notes. What can we learn from each other in informal conversation, sort of a regular working group that shares ideas, practices, and maybe in the process helps? So if there's interest in that, let me know, because I'd be delighted to try to organize that. So again, thank you all very much for the last 75 minutes, both for those who listened and more especially for those who talked and the questions. Thank you very much. See you soon. Bye-bye.